really a lot.
Oh, yeah. Jan told me to call you, right?
I'm glad.
A good thing. Okay, should we, are you still seeing people coming in, Dalen? I think I'd like to go ahead and get
There's
started.
a steady stream of people joining, but we probably can go ahead and get started.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover. And as I was talking with Jackie, I'm like, 2 hours is not going to do it, but we'll cover as much as we can. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for SAMCAR's session on HOAs. What you don't know can hurt you. And I think you're gonna come away with a real theme of that, of how important it is to be knowledgeable in terms of what we're doing when it comes to helping our clients buy common interest developments such as HOA, and the homeowners association properties. So our speaker for today is Jacquie Berry. I think a lot of you already know Jackie, so she doesn't need a ton of introduction. Jackie is the owner of Community Association Data Source, and that is a company that has been in existence since 1998 and does reviews of documents, the HOA documents for people who are looking to buy or sell, or even HOA boards out there. So thank you so much, Jackie, for doing this. This is our biggest group ever. We're at 136 registered. I am, in terms of housekeeping, going to ask everybody to please stay muted as much as possible and put your questions into the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat to try to make sure that we keep the flow going forward, because we have a lot to talk about even without any extra questions. So we do have that. And this, as you logged in, you may notice that this is being recorded. We are not sure yet if we're going to be sending out or sharing the recording. So I would encourage everyone who's online. I know sometimes when you're on an online seminar, it's easy to kind of check out. I would encourage you to be ready, take notes. You can, yes, take screenshots of things, whatever you need to do, but stay engaged, and your questions, we're going to try to get to as many as we can. But again, please stay muted so that we can avoid background noise and distraction for everyone. So with that, welcome to Jackie. Thank you so much. She's so great to be able to be willing to share with us information. And anytime I've ever asked her, she's always been open to coming out to speaking with us. So thank you so much, Jackie, for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and launch right in. We went through the different questions that we want to talk about, but the big one that we wanted to start off with, because we're going to just hit the ground running. We're going to talk about balcony inspections, which have to do with SB 326. So if you can maybe, first of all, explain what that is for the people who may not know. And again, for everybody here, we're assuming that, I asked Jackie to assume that you have some amount of a basic knowledge of what an HOA is and whatnot, but I think the balcony inspections are a big piece right now. So if you can explain a little bit about what it is, how it's impacting HOAs, what you're seeing, and the like.
That's great. Yeah. I'm always excited to come to your group because I get so much feedback from you, and that's important to be able to do the educational classes for you. And I know that that's one of the things that SAMCAR is very likes to do that. So you guys know it as SB, oh my gosh, that one went away because
326.
Okay, there you go. It is now known as Civil Code 5551. And that is because it was chartered in and it is set in stone. Right now, there is a lot of confusion about what is it? Why are you responsible for it? And how do we know our associations are responsible? And so one of the things that I always do, and I preceded this almost in every class, you got to know the difference between a condominium and a planned development. A townhouse is a style, but not an ownership. You only have ownership in airspace, which is a condominium, or a planned development where you own the land as well. Now, I know that sounds pretty cut and dry. You got two different types of property. Therefore, the law is set in stone for each one of those types. And that's not quite true. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview first, and then I've always wanted to make it so that we have questions, because I can walk you through the process. In a condominium, you own the airspace. You own the walls in, the floor is up, and the ceiling down. That's yours. The plasterboard from the inside. So I'm going to give you an example because this kind of gives you the other part of it. If you have a shower and it has a pipe behind the wall, that pipe behind the wall belongs to the association to maintain the majority of the time. That's in common area. And you have an inside. So that plasterboard, let's say that it's not your shower knob or the head, then if it's the head, you unscrew it, you put a new one on, you're done. If it's a leak behind the wall, the association will come in, knock out that portion of the wall that is necessary to access that pipe. They will repair the pipe. They will not repair the wall because the wall is yours. So a lot of people are very confused about that. And that's one of the reasons that you get an insurance policy that helps to cover to defray some of these costs. So everybody will go, well, I'm going to get a new shower wall. But what happens is if it's a condominium where you only own that airspace, you get to fix the plasterboard. They will put, and a lot of them, they will install the plasterboard, but any of the surfaces, the tile or whatever, they will not replace. So be thoughtful of that. In a planned unit development, they were great ideas, and the developers in the early 80s and 90s found that they were in lawsuits all the time. So they started building not a condominium, but a planned development. Buildings all look the same, but the ownership is what you've got to look at. And you can't just look at it and say planned unit development owner is responsible for, a condominium the HOA is responsible for. The governing documents, you know, that thing called the CC&Rs, you're going to have to look at that all the time when you're selling a piece of property right now. Because you can have I've got two buildings that we used to manage. The developer, we were the ones that set the projects up many years ago when we had our management company. One is a condominium. He got sued and it cost him millions of dollars. And when he built the next one next door to it, identical, same color and everything. It looked like they were married together, but that's a planned development. It's a townhouse style. And what they did is they took one lot and split it between 4 units that sat on that lot. So you own that little plot of land underneath that unit, and the next door neighbor owns their little lot and so forth. So, and when you're looking at it that way, you own the building and the land. But what about maintenance? You can't just say it's a planned development, therefore the association isn't responsible, but the owner is. You've literally got to go into their governing documents, look at the maintenance responsibilities to determine who's responsible. So when this bill came up, this, I'm going to call it 5551, so you'll get used to that number. When that became law, everybody went a little crazy and they said, well, if a townhouse, and I said, ownership, please. Oh, you know, where they own the land too. Wouldn't the owners be responsible? Well, interestingly enough, a couple of years ago, they had to actually define that again, saying that if you own a planned unit development, you own the land and the building, then the owner is responsible. Well, that was sort of true. But again, a fallacy, because some of the planned developments governing documents were kind of a mix and match of words. So it would say something like the owner is responsible for the painting on the exterior, or they're responsible for their own plumbing or whatever. But in some instances where it came to who's responsible for the maintenance of a structural issue, such as the balconies, and that's what they call a load-bearing piece of the lot itself or the unit. Sometimes they made the responsibility the owners, and every once in a while, because everybody goes, I'm not going to fight over who's going to pay for the roof. And if you've got a fight between 4 people, mine has a leak in it, theirs doesn't, they don't want to replace it, I do. I don't want to have to fight for them. So they took some of the bigger components, and one of them just happened to be the balcony structure. So you've got to look at the governing documents. If you're selling in a planned unit development, do not take it for granted that the owners association is not responsible. You've got to get one of two things if it's a planned unit development where you own the land and the structure. You got to look at the documents about the maintenance responsibility to designate that. And then you want the association, if their governing documents say that some parts of that would be the owners and some would be the associations, you need an attorney opinion letter. But let's set the planned unit developments aside and make an assumption for just this particular moment that an owner is responsible for that. Right now, SB 341 and Civil Code 5551, townhouses or the structure itself in a planned unit development are not bound by this law. So you have to take note that the balconies are kind of like in a quagmire right now. If they're responsible to maintain it, you have to find out who is responsible. I've said for a long time, you know, termites, dry rot, and all of that doesn't take precedence over whether it's a condo or a PUD. So a lot of you, when you're doing a planned unit development, you're doing pest control, right? So you get your pest control, you find out if there's termites, dry rot, or whatever. That document should give you anything relating to them having looked at the balcony, and therefore that is a structural issue that is disclosable at the time of sale. So I make up words sometimes, so disposal. Anyway, so in this particular instance, if it is a true condominium, you still have to look towards the governing documents and who's responsible for the maintenance. No matter what you talk about, the pocketbook is the resident owner. Okay, you can't separate the money from the person or the ownership. So sooner or later, no matter which division or part of properties that you're going to be selling, they are going to be covered on the pocketbook of the owner. I had a little bit of a cold, so I'll keep drinking water. Okay, so are there any questions up to this point?
I think we're good, so.
Okay, good. All right.
Yep.
So ownership is really something that you have to be very, very conscious of. When you're selling a single family house, you get the termite inspection, or the buyers do. There's certain work that has to be done. But when they're doing, I love this because the buyers, when they're buying, regardless of what kind of property, they only get an inspection on the interior because that's what they own. But termites don't eat just airspace. In fact, they don't get very fat on airspace. So that structure, you really should be doing a little bit more in looking at the fact that you've got to look at the exterior, because if there is termite work and the association is not responsible for it, that's a debt that you're going to be passing to the buyer. The buyer may want to negotiate that, which is why our contracts are very flexible when it comes to these negotiation parts. So again, you're looking at some of this stuff, and the biggest one, of course, is the balconies, because you cannot, associations, if it is a condominium, they are responsible for the whole structure other than the airspace. They have to have done an inspection no later than December 31st, 2024, which is just 1 year away. We're really close. They also have to have done the work. So that is a big thing. I have one now in San Francisco, and they said to me, their quote to me was, Jackie, I don't know why you keep coming back and saying that there has to be further information regarding the balconies. We know we've got balconies, but they're cement. I said, it's not, and we're not responsible for that law. And I said to him, so tell me something. What's holding those balconies up? Wood. Some of them are steel. That's great. They're set on those. But if it has a wood connection to any part of that balcony structure in the building, it is something that has to be inspected. So this particular one that I do a lot of reviews on, I said to them, I said, why are you fighting getting an attorney opinion letter? Get an attorney opinion letter, and if they say you're not responsible, then let's have the letter in the package so that we can say they've had their attorney look at this and their opinion is they're not responsible. And they said, well, it's too costly. I said, yeah, the $600 that you're going to spend on that is going to save you every phone call that you get where you have to call me. Because they're never easy, right? So the big thing here is that know your structure, know what you're selling, because then you cannot just look at the document, say it's a condo. Oh, the association is responsible. Oh, it's a planned development. Because remember, there's no ownership of a townhouse. That's a style, and both condos and PUDs come in those styles. So you have to really be clear about that. So that's a harder one because you're listing a piece of property. You want to get as much as you can for that property, but the value of that property is directly related to the value of what they've got in reserves, which is one of the things that we have. Unless there's some other questions about balconies, I'll kind of move into the reserves and how this all fits together.
Well, so Jackie, are you seeing a lot of, so the condos are now, even though its deadline is end of next year, you are seeing probably a lot of condos that are getting their inspections done now. What are you seeing in terms of that?
Okay, a lot of these associations, the smaller ones, any 3 or more units are required to have these inspections. And I'm seeing that for a long time, there was a lot of people that would say, oh, well, we'll wait to get down the line and we'll kind of gather some money so we'll have the money to do the inspections. And I said, if you wait too long, it has to be done by a licensed engineer. And you know, they get really busy, especially with something like this. There are several companies that have come out of the woodwork that have started doing these balconies, but they may not get on the list in time. And there's a big fine that's going to come up at that time if they have not done that inspection. Those inspections now have to be put into their budgets to be done every 9 years. So that physical inspection with the engineer is going to have to be every 9 years. But there's some things that have just come up in some new laws to bring me into that. The new laws are requiring that associations have to have inspections. Most of the time, currently, the reserve studies are a visual inspection. Somebody goes up, walks around the building, says, this looks good, walks away, puts it in a report, and they use the numbers of what they calculate as to how many square foot, how much it would cost to do it if you had to do it today. And then if it's got anything that's got a 1 to 30 year life expectancy has to be on that reserve study. So that's a big issue right now because the laws are changing and it's going to have to be not just a visual inspection, which by the way, they started the reserve study companies so that we would have numbers that we could use to crunch our budgets for the next year. Well, now if we have to have engineering reports done every year on certain load bearing type processes, like it's not the balconies because they said 9 years, you should be able to deal with that. Let me give you one other point that I keep forgetting to do. So the inspection is done by a reserve study company with an engineering or an engineer that knows about structural. And it has to do with the physical being of that building. Well, I kind of lost my train of thought there for a second. So let me just regrasp this. So the associations are going to have to start doing engineering reports on certain components and they'll rotate them out. So they won't do them every 9 years, but they'll have to do them maybe every 5 years for certain things of the structure itself that are going to have to be replaced. Reserve studies are going to become much more technical and they're also going to become much more expensive. And they're also going to stay being required by the associations. So in a planned unit development, they do have to do reserve studies. They're not gonna have to do the same structural unless their CCNRs require that they maintain them. So it's going to be something that's gonna have to be maintained by the association. So look, that we've got a couple of bills that actually have increased that already. I am seeing that they're scattering to try and get somebody to come in to do the work. They're getting down to the wire where June or July will be they'll be their inspections, but then they have to do the repairs, and sometimes those take 5 to 6 months or longer to do. So they really are behind the 8 ball if they haven't already had that inspection.
So
The
is that something that you include in your evaluation, is looking at whether they've done the balcony inspections or not?
Absolutely.
And then how do you advise somebody if you're saying that they don't have it scheduled even yet?
Okay, so that is kind of the calculation that has to be done. So associations have to have evaluated with an engineering department that they can say 95% of our units are in good shape. If they can't qualify that 95% of if they do just spot testing, that they can say, we're guaranteed that if we do these, that 95% of our market will be fine. If they can't say that, then they have to do an inspection of every single deck. And a lot of these older buildings can't say that, even if they do spots. So they have to say, if we do 95%, or if we do 50% of our buildings, or even 25%, because of the cost of the inspection itself, they're going to be okay. If it's a planned unit development, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to predict something. Let me ask my magic 8 ball here. Are they going to have to start doing inspections, the owners, sellers, before they close? Oh my goodness, let's see. It doesn't want to even come up. It says undoubtedly. So I would say within the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to start seeing, I use this all the time in my seminars, and I use it when I'm doing a review. We have to, what we're doing is we can't guarantee that they've done them, but we can say you may want to ask specifically if your inspection was done on your unit, and then get a copy of it. If it's a planned development, you're going to want that, or even a condominium that says we're not responsible, then you want an opinion letter from their attorney. And that's what we're really doing, is we're identifying some things you can do to cover not only your sellers, but your buyers, because the buyer is buying the debt of whatever it's going to cost to maintain those buildings going forward. So basically, I think within the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see that those reserve studies are going to be more engineering, and even in a planned development, that's going to start happening. So the owners, if they're responsible for the maintenance of that building, will have to start having them like you do with termite reports.
So in the meantime, if you have a buyer who's looking to buy a condominium and there is no inspection report done yet on the balcony inspections, what would be your recommendation, or how would you address that?
Okay, so our job is not to scare the heck out of people.
Right.
But it is to get them to a point where they understand that there may be other things that are going to come up and they need to plan for them. If it's a condominium, truly a condominium, and they are responsible for the replacement of those components, which are load-bearing parts, which are the balconies, you're going to want an attorney opinion letter. If they haven't done inspections of all of the units, you're going to want the letter to state that. But if it has had an inspection done, you can ask if they would provide you with just that portion of the report. Again, we're not there to scare people, but we are to put them on notice and to get them so that they're thinking ahead that, oh my gosh, I don't want to water my plants because that's dry rot. It'll go into the structure itself, and therefore there's a bigger problem. So a lot of times the associations have even cut off people having plants on that deck at all. And so you want to notify that. If you've got one that's got pretty plants up because it's been staged that way, and they're not fake plants, we know those are not going to be fake plants, you're going to want to make sure that that the people that are moving in there know that there are certain rules that they may have to get information from the board of directors other than what is in their documentation. But usually they will have some kind of a plant architectural plan so that you can have certain kinds of plants. Railings, you don't want to put them on the railings because of hazard of your cat walking by and knocking it off and hitting someone on the head down below. Could be you on your lower balcony.
Right.
Your
So
patio.
if you, yeah, and so even, so if they haven't done any inspections on their own, and if a buyer wanted to get there, would you have them recommend that they try to get their own inspections done? You would still need to get that
Yeah.
permitted by the
Because
HOA.
it's not civil code driven, yes, absolutely. A buyer should have the right to get any kind of an inspection that they want. Buyers may know that the building is older and that there's been some talk about it, and just to be on the safe side, may want to get their own inspection. I know that engineers are a little bit more expensive, but it can certainly save a lot in the long run. Because if you've had plants on your balcony and you can see there's dry rot, that repair is going to show up on your termite inspection. It needs to get fixed. Some of the lenders will require that work be done even before you can close escrow. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. On the ones that the lenders are looking at, the condominiums, if there's an agreement in place that those are going to be inspected, you just need to provide that to them because they will work around that in their appraisals and their evaluations.
And as you mentioned, the lenders, so that balcony inspection does impact if there is an inspection available, is my understanding. But if it's not yet, the lenders aren't necessarily going out and asking for it yet because the deadline hasn't happened. Is that what you're saying?
I just had one ask for it this morning.
The lender come out and ask for the
Yeah,
balcony inspection.
Because there's new FHA laws that say, 70% of all of our loans are sold to FHA. And so even if you go out to a bank, I used to work for First Franklin. It's not around anymore. But when I was younger, my daughter started running my business, the management business, and I went to Southern California to learn from Steve Dallas how this thing worked. And one of the funnest things I ever did was how we got together once a month to put together enough loans that fit into this particular category so we could sell them to the secondary market. It's changed pretty drastically as far as the lenders are concerned right now, but we are starting to see that come back because if you're going to sell to FHA, regardless of which kind of a company, whether it's a bank or whether they hold their own loans for a certain time, a portfolio lender or whatever, they are starting to ask these questions because they know that they're going to eventually sell them.
Yeah.
And if that's going to happen, they have to sell them under the guidelines for FHA right now. I'm learning more about those all the time. I get the underwriting letters and I do try and ask questions on that too. But it is getting to be more daunting. And there are more and more of these, I would say 70, one of the stats that I saw the other day was 70% of all new construction is going to be condos. And at least 75%, right, roughly between 70 and 75% of those loans are sold to FHA. So they will all start using the same guidelines. They'll go to the highest end and work their way down.
Right.
Some of them are going to portfolio them that they're going to be a little more lenient.
Okay. And
Let me
if
just
a
say
buyer,
one thing on that one thing. So if you're going to sell a condominium and it has a little bit of maintenance that's going to have to get done, don't sell this. I'm not going to say don't sell. Be careful about taking an offer and accepting an offer that's a 10 to 15% down payment. Because the minute it falls into that category, the lenders are going to look much closer at that association than they would if it was a 20% down. They all look at that. What Steve used to tell me is that's how much skin do they have in the game. And so they're not looking for first and last month rent, but somebody who is going to be able to afford to be there long-term if there are special assessments.
and if a buyer has a hard time getting an inspection, like the HOA doesn't do it, they don't want the buyer to do it, at least they should just be aware. Is that what you would say?
If it's a condominium, they don't have a choice.
Right.
So you would put them on notice. Again,
Oh, they don't
our
have choice.
report is all about the risk levels.
Mhm.
What level does the association comply with the Davis-Sterling Act or all of the civil codes? And then what risk is that buyer willing to take on?
Got it.
So those two things marry together very nicely. And if somebody says, no, we're not gonna do the inspections and it's a condominium,
Mhm.
you might take your client by the hand and say, I love you. I know you love this unit. You already know where you're gonna have your Sunday relaxation but let's find another one because they don't really have it together. 99% of how that building operates is done by a board of directors. That board of directors is elected or by default becomes on the board of directors. And most of the time, they do not understand what they are dealing with. And this is a good time to kind of bring in that these are quasi-governments. The cities love them because a lot of the streets that they used to have to maintain, the swimming pool, the parks and recreation, all is done inside of the association. So I have a real quick little thing. It says, so here's the comparison chart on the quasi-government between them and the association. It's the city charter, there's the CC&Rs and the homeowner association. City council, the board of directors, also has to have the meeting is the same as the Brown Act. Open meetings for certain things, executive for others. Mayor is the president. City manager is the community manager. Citizens are the members, elections are elections, taxes are assessments. And the cities, I mean, whether you were paying, if you were gonna get payment, you would be doing it in taxes, but in this, you get not only taxes, but you also get the association. And just ordinances are the rules and regulations, hearings and hearings, fines are fines. This one I loved, jail, suspended of privileges in an association. Public Works, maintenance department, Parks and Recreation is a recreational department. So they're all very, very similar, but cities have a lot more protection because you can't sue them if you slip and fall on certain, parts. But in associations, it seems to be something that comes up quite frequently. So remember, you're selling not only a home, but a multi-million-dollar corporation.
Good to
That
know.
could be funded well or could be broke.
Yep.
So-
And so kind of moving on to our next subject, as you talk about funding, you did talk about reserves already, but what are you seeing in terms of the big issues for reserves, what to watch out for? And the question that I get often is how much percent are you looking for? Like what's a good healthy reserves, or
Great.
how would you advise
Reserves are
people?
one of my favorite things because I swore I would never get back into property management again. And I'm managing a project in San Francisco. It's a 38 unit, 6-rise, 6-story. By the way, all of them are going to go up because you can get, the cities can bring them to downtown for a blight area. And like I said, 70% of all new construction will be condos. So agents, you can't run away from them and you can't hide from them because they're going to become a very big part. Right now, it's 25% of our market. Within the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see it being up in the 40s and then in the 50s and then in the 60s because there's no more land to be able to go out. So especially in the areas that you guys are dealing with. Reserves are one of my favorite and least favorite things all at the same time. Everybody says, well, we have a roof and we have a 30-year roof, so we don't have to collect money for it yet. And remember I said 1 to 30 year, you have to start collecting money now and you have to have it on the list. I had associations that would say, let's take the roof off because it's 30 years out, Well, then they forgot to put it back on. And then all of a sudden it was getting to be 15 years, 10 years, 5 years. And they go, who's responsible for the roof in a meeting? Oh, we are. Well, we don't have any money. So the concept is that the money is a savings account and it's a portion of your dues. So the concept is everybody pays for the fair share of the use of the component they have now. So that means owner, seller. So when a seller is selling, you need to know what that financial position of that association is, because the value that you've listed the property isn't like it was a year and a half ago, where people were bidding 200,000 over market to get into a property. Now you're seeing this other, and I am seeing a lot of lawsuits coming up around those no contingency offers. It's secret, I know, but I don't know where every one of them is, but I know a few of them because I get calls on it. So be very careful about the listing agent. If I could say the one thing you want to steer away from is telling somebody they don't have the right to do their due diligence. And that's what you're doing when you take their rights to review documents.
So what is the lawsuit? It's that they weren't given the chance to, what are they claiming?
Okay, so I'm hearing all kinds of different things, but a couple of the lawyers that I'm pretty connected with will go in and they go, we go to court and we say to the agent, did you order the documents? Well, our title company did. And we got all the documents. Okay, so you got all the documents. Did you review them? Well, no, that's not our job. I'm just using terms that the attorneys are using with me. No, it's not our job. It's not your job to evaluate them, but you certainly need to know what the value of that property is based on how much reserves they have, right? And a few other little quirky things like reading the minutes so you know what's going on. So number one, you can't just go online. The title companies are saying, we go online, we pay $700, $800, $1,000 for a set of documents. We get them off of one of the services that the associations put their documents in. We assume that we can rely on them. I said, remember what the word assume means. So the big thing here is you might have gotten the documents, you may have paid $1,000 for them, but you cannot rely on that they fit or meet the criteria of the Davis Sterling. And the biggest one, of course, is that budget. If they haven't had a reserve study in the last 5 years, they're required to do a reserve study with a physical inspection every 3 years and update it every year with work that they did the previous year. So if they did half of the roofs, that number has to change. And so that's what associations don't always understand. So their budgets can't be correct because you don't have accurate information to provide to the reserve study companies. The second part of this is they said, okay, so you got the documents. Did you evaluate the financial health of the association? Well, I sort of did, and it was so seriously underfunded, I didn't want to know, so I didn't go any further. The value of the property, again, I keep saying this because this is one of my pet peeves, is that the value is directly related to the reserves, and that is the owner having paid for the usage of their component as they own it. If they leave the debt by, and I am a buyer and I decide I'm okay with that, or I want to negotiate it, CAR is the one that got that bill passed that said, we don't want to know on the cash flow, because if I have 200,000, I'm only going to spend 10. You would always get the letters. That was what the committee, and I was part of that committee back then, that said, well, what do? We've got this, and it says that they're financially healthy. I said, well, that's only good because it's a cash flow. So they said, no, we only want it on the accrual basis. That's where reserve studies started getting really popular. So the accrual basis means it calculates the roof has a 30-year, it calculates it right then. It's on the accrual basis of accounting. Without that accrual-based accounting philosophy, the associations don't raise their dues. They go, I don't want to pay more, and then they don't. And then all of a sudden you get down the line and you get left with a great big, huge deficit. Should be negotiable. That's one of the things that we talked about at the committee. It should be negotiable at the time of sale because you're asking someone to pick up your credit card debt on the back end. So I call it credit card debt because it's a requirement. So one of the things that's either in the association savings account so that you can do it, and you ask, what is the percentage? This is kind of an awkward place to be because 70% of a $6,000 deficit is nothing compared to, but if you get a lot of association units, it could be in the millions of dollars. So you have to look at, there's 3 documents, and I tell everybody this, and then they call me and ask me how to do it again, so I'm fine with that. You cannot do a reserve study analysis at your level as an agent without a current balance sheet, which is not a required document, by the way, guys. I get blown out of the water every single time a manager says, well, we don't have to provide those. I'm the seller, I want that, we need that, the buyers ask for it. You've got to have a current balance sheet. That doesn't mean 6 months old. Because there's a new law that came out a couple of years ago that says every board of director has to get 6 different financial documents every month, even if they don't meet every month. Let's say they only meet on a quarterly basis. At that quarterly, they have to have reviewed all the financials and ratify them in the minutes. We started taking roll call vote on that because we know that some of them don't read the documents either on the board of directors. So everybody likes to pass the buck to somebody else, but in that particular instance, they're required as a fiduciary duty to inspect those financials and ask questions. We had a board of director meeting the other night, and I swear to you, they got the same financials I did. They were supposed to read them, and they're asking me questions that they should have already known the answer to. We went through it. I explained to them and how important it was for them to be reviewing those, because they thought they had been paying a water bill for 20 years that belonged to somebody else because it had an address and the company name at some other address. So there's a lot of things around that. That's why they started doing it. Boards have to take the fiduciary responsibility. They take it on, they get voted. Sometimes they do because they didn't get their deck inspected and done right. So, there's a lot of things around that. But obviously, there's a lot of players to these transactions. So lenders want to see, truthfully, they want to see 70% or better in there. They're going down, they're looking at the minutes to see if there's any special assessments coming up. Underwriters look at things a little bit differently on the documents, and they just want to get those FHA regulations taken care of. So you're going to find that it slips through the crack every once in a while. But financially, again, I had one that was 30% funded, and it was $3 million. $3 million divided by 100 units was a sizable number. It happened to be in Tiburon. And so, you look at Tiburon and say, oh, well, they have the money. Well, it doesn't make any difference because that happens on the other side too. So depending on the value of the property that you're selling, if you're in the lower range, what is it now? 400,000 up to about 800,000, right at 750 or something around there. Those are the ones you've got to really scrutinize, because those are the ones that are going to be hurt by not being able to pay any special assessments that are going to come along. The ones that are in the 900 to about $1.5 million they've got the funds, they understand, you can explain it to them up front. Here's the deficit, it's $8,000 a door. I'm seeing it all over the place. And the buyers, if they're in the middle to upper caste, I can take care of that. I mean, one of the ladies was moving from New York to San Francisco and bought a loft for, it was $6 million. And that was a few years back. And when I called her and said, oh, well, they're $89,000 deficit per door, thinking she was going to be shocked, she goes, I can take you to the restaurants where the ladies' menu doesn't have the prices, and I can write you the check at the same time. Yeah. So you have to look at the value of the property. How effective will that come? Should you be negotiating? We have to wear our negotiation hats. That's what our job is as real estate agents. And sometimes the seller doesn't want to, but it's in black and white. Here it is.
And it's a matter of what risk your buyer is willing to take. So you mentioned there are 3 documents to look at. So you mentioned the current balance sheet.
Okay, so the first is the balance sheet you've got to have.
Right.
You've got to have the budget, because in the budget, it is going to have what's called the assessment reserve funding schedule. And that one, you have to look at the date that it was done, because if it's too old, it's not gonna give you the numbers, but they'll usually update those. That's one of the disclosures in the budget. The budget's not a one-pager, guys. It's anywhere from a 10 to a 50 or more page document that gives the buyer or the owners an opportunity to look at the financial health of that association. So that is the second document that you need, that is the reserve analysis that tells you how much should be in the reserves today. And then you need to look at the actual document itself, which is the reserve study, because that assessment reserve is a snapshot. You can usually get how much should be in the reserves versus how much you do have in the reserves. And you look at the current balance sheet, those will give you the pieces that you need to calculate that number. And sometimes that's a little goes over people's heads, but I would say that one document, if it's a current document, I always say that it has to be for this year. And by the way, we're in budget time right now. By the end of next month, the budgets have to be in everybody's hands. So if you're getting ready to sell, make sure that you find out whether that's already in place. If you can get copies of it. Some of them have already sent out their budgets. So it kind of depends on that association and the board. If there's an election, a meeting coming up that they're going to explain some of these, perhaps the buyer could get the code number and go to that meeting. They won't be able to participate, but they could at least see or get information from it. Sellers are obligated to perform by giving the percentage funded as well as the dollar per door. Now, even though they're on their way out the door. That's why they hire agents, right? To do all that footwork. So you can't just not look at those documents. You need to know what that is, because they may be coming back. You may have it listed for 480,000, and after you reduce that price by whatever is in the reserves, because you're going to you've got the two market values. You've got the market value based on the real estate market, and then you've got the one based on how much money do they have. So those two have to marry together. And read the minutes. If you don't look at anything else, if you look at those two, the financial, the budget, if you don't have a current balance sheet, you have to ask for that. That's one of the things we do is notify the associations. We give you a list that goes back to them, because these associations do not evaluate their documents. They don't know how financially healthy it is. The managers don't know, the board doesn't know, and yet they get the financials. So these are things that everybody relies on somebody else to do the work, but we all have to do a piece of the work and ask questions. And certainly getting the documents, and even if we do the review for you, you need to do it before you put it on the market.
Take a look at it for sure.
A little bit of time to get some of these other documents or find the time frames for them. But the certified public accounts report is the other very important financial. The certified public accountant, if they have 75,000 of income a year or more, they have to have it's not really an audit, but it's a review of the financials. And that is important because the notes are amazing. I found last week 2 different sections where I found in the CPA report that the association had bank loans. And I want to bring this to your attention. What the association figured out is, if we make it a line item in our reserves and have a $4 million loan, we have the money that makes us look really good in our financial health, but we have a $3 million loan to pay back.
Wow.
And because they're supposed to state that, that's on that one form that I told you in the budget. They have to tell you if there's a bank loan, how much, who's it with, how much it is, and when it gets paid off. But if they borrowed the money and put it into the reserves, I'm saying to them, how can you put a payment for a bank loan, which is the reserves are the components, and a bank loan is not a component. It's to pay for those. And they're willing to take the, you know, I think it's ludicrous that they do it that way. I always check this because that is one of the things I'm finding a lot of the time. So you can't just rely on the fact that they said they haven't addressed the fact that they have a loan. But if they do have a loan, and they should be saying that it's being paid out of our reserves. The reserve loan is a loan for 30 years. You cannot pay it off. If they have a bank loan where it is for specific things, that bank loan should be paid off at the time of sale. If the seller has, or the person selling has not already paid it off. Then the lenders are looking at that, and they're going to pick up on this thing that how they're putting those bank loans into their reserves. And I don't think it's going to fly, because that's a debt that the buyer has to pay for regardless.
Right. So,
Yes, it's part of their budget.
yeah, so as somebody asked, isn't the loan payment, so if there is a loan by the HOA, isn't that considered part of the income statement or their balance? Shouldn't that be part of their budget and all of that, or?
Yes,
operating
yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, and yes,
But
but
they
it
don't-
doesn't always
But
show up.
yeah, okay,
Because remember I said that the only way I found the fact that they had a $3 million bank loan for 30 years was I read the notes in the CPA report.
Mhm.
In the other one where they're supposed to, and there's if nothing, you could also read in your budget when you get it, it is the policy statement. And in that policy statement, one of the questions is there a bank loan? If there is a bank loan and they're paying it on a monthly basis, it is not hidden in the reserves. It's out there and they've stated it. That bank loan should be paid off by the seller at the time of closing. And that's usually the way that it is. And fortunately or unfortunately, I have a daughter who has a collection company, and we have many discussions, some heated, some very cold, but one that we have that's always heated is that associations do bank loans, but they don't put liens on anybody. There should be a voluntary lien. I can't pay it off. I'm willing to pay it over the next, it's a 5 or 10 year loan. The ones that you're going to be seeing, it should be paid off. That person that's selling should make the full payment on that, because it was already voted on and was a bank loan. So there should be a voluntary lien that notes to everybody in the world. That would be another way to do it, but they aren't recording those. So now you can't see it there either. So it's a hidden agenda. And
so when you say a bank loan needs to be paid off by the seller, is that in the form of special assessments? That's what they're doing, and the seller needs to pay their
so
portion back?
they go out and they get a bank loan because they're going to put
Right.
just the roof on.
Right.
The roof is going to cost them $100,000. So they go out to the bank and they get $100,000. They put it in their operating. You will see that bank loan on the operating.
Mhm.
You will see it in the other documents. So now that bank loan, I can't afford to pay it off totally. Let's say it's $20,000 to me. Okay. I don't have the money to pay it, but I can make a monthly payment. But now I sell my property. That is not an assumable loan when they do it that way, where it's all very clear, cut and dry, specific item. But when they do it, and this is the argument that I get in with my daughter, is that now they've got a 30-year loan. Shouldn't they have a lien on that property? You know, and she says, yes, they should have the loan on it, but it doesn't get paid off at the time of closing. That person can assume that particular loan because it's for many of the components. So there's things, so if the bank loan is in the reserves and they're paying it out of they've raised their dues. So rather than $30 going towards reserves in yours, you're paying $50 because you're paying $20 to go and pay that $3 million loan off. Okay, so then that is in there, it automatically it should show up in the bank statements and the financials, and sometimes it does, but like I said, the only place I ever found it was in the CPA reports on a couple of them. I was taken back by how hidden it was, and I said, That's one of those hidden things that we're talking about today.
So so you were saying though that that bank loan, the seller's portion does need to be paid off. It can't be, the buyer can't just take that on and
If
continue
it
with those
is a
payments.
bank loan where
Mhm.
each month the homeowner is paying in their assessment, like the guy,
Right.
let's say that the dues are $300 a month. And if they're $300 a month, that's without that loan. I can't pay for it, so my dues every month are $320 because I'm paying $20 to pay off that loan. They're usually 5 to 10 year loans then, not a 30-year,
Mhm.
5 to 10 year loans. Those loans are not assumable. Because just because they've done it so that everybody has time to pay it off. If you they don't do it at refinancing, but you can pay it off if you want. But whatever the balance is for you, and it's a 30-year, I mean, it's in there, and you're paying for it, a buyer does not get to pick that up. It's a non-assumable.
Got
The
it.
other one is assumable because of the way they put it in into the reserve.
Right. Right. So that bank payment is basically going to be added on to whatever their HOA dues are, but if you sell, you need to pay off the balance of it.
Right, so
before you
now the
sell.
new buyer will only be paying 300 because that $20 you were paying towards paying it off is no longer there.
Got it. So there is a question regarding the three, because you said that there were three documents. So there's the current balance sheet, the budget, and the reserve study. Those are the three, and then you mentioned the CPA report. Is that
Basically,
better?
I would go the CPA report, so
Okay.
balance sheet, assessment reserve funding plan, and then this other part, which is the CPA report.
Okay, and that's good to know because that's a good tip, because the CPA report or the letter, a lot of times people skim over that. You don't really, think about that too much, but I think that's good to know. There's a question, wouldn't the bank loan or the special assessment show up on an HOA demand? I'm assuming it would, right? On an
Yeah,
HOA
if
payoff
it's to be
demand,
paid off, it will show up on the demand.
anything that needs to be paid off will
Yeah.
show up. Yeah.
Yes, and that is one of the big things. I was not seeing those bank loans, and I know the ones that were hidden in, I call it hidden. It was, to me, it's hidden because you have to know what you're looking for in order to be able to find it. And the CPA wouldn't have to make note of that because they're doing all the crunching numbers.
Right.
But
the
on
one in,
the other ones, it is pretty clear. That's a 10-year loan. Interest rate and everything has to be identified. And so should the other one. It just should say 30-year loan.
right, got it.
Unassuming.
But that reserve loan doesn't get paid off. It just kind of
It keeps
continues
going
on,
for
right?
30 years.
Yeah, whatever the term is.
The banks love those. But then because they're getting interest on all of that for 30 years from a guarantee, guess what? They take theirs off the top every month.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, so somebody is asking, so it does show up in the payoff demand. Should you explicitly, if we're putting in a purchase agreement in place, do we need to explicitly say that the seller needs to pay it off at closing? Would you recommend putting that into the purchase agreement?
No, you don't.
And
Because
escrow won't close it without that payoff
right.
demand paid off, right?
That's really on the association side with the seller. The big thing is the dollar amount that you just paid for that property, whether you choose to negotiate it at that time.
Okay,
So if I see that I'm gonna pick up a tab for a $20,000 special assessment, of which a balance of 18,000 is still due, and it's in the it's in the budget, and that's what it says, then when that'll say always, because those are non-assumable loans, it will always say that it has to be paid off, and it will be a line item on the closing statement for the seller.
Yeah. So and there are a couple other questions, but I'm gonna kind of so the CPA report, do you mean the audited report, or is the financial?
Very few of the associations are doing audits, they're doing reviews, which is very similar to, it's just not, they don't take every invoice and go in an audit, every piece of paper counts. In this, they're doing spot checking and the tallying of the numbers and seeing they get the year-end financials so they can see what goes to where. So the CPA report If it's under 75,000, it's not required. So your smaller projects of 10, 15 projects that aren't in that $75,000 category, you're not gonna see that. So you want the most current balance sheet and financial report would probably be better.
Got it. And there's a question about, and we're going to move on after this one, but in terms of the bank loan, and we said it's not transferable, it needs to be, I guess somebody is asking, Daniel's asking, could it be given as a credit on escrow and the buyers take on the future? Can the buyers agree to take it on? I guess that's
Okay.
the question.
There's two different kinds of loans. The first loan is up to like a $30,000, $50,000 loan or $100,000, which has a time frame on it of up to 10 years, basically. Okay, that's that one. The other one that I talk about being, that one is not assumable because it has to be paid off at the escrow because they have a loan to pay against it. And every time they do, then their payments get less and they'll zero it out. That's the hope that before that time frame is up, that it will have zeroed itself out. The other one, where it's in the reserves, is a whole different ballpark. And I can't give you as much detail as I would like to, because I'm still taken back by the fact that they could do this without disclosing it a little different. If it's a $3 million loan that they have a 30-year time frame on, and the payment is coming out of the reserves, that's not an assumable loan. I mean, excuse me. That one is an assumable loan.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry, that back me out. So rewind.
Kind of threw me off for a second.
If
Okay.
that is an assumable loan, you will just continue making the payment every year if there's interest increases or whatever, because most of those are adjustable rate mortgages, so the payments are going to go up over the years. That will have to be part of the budget.
Okay, got it. And then one more question about the CPA report. So that is, you mentioned it's only for properties that have more than $75,000 in income. Is that an yearly, is it, for those that are, is it an annual review that is required?
Annual review, yes, just for that 1 year. It is done at the same time that CPA does the tax returns. They do the tax returns and they do that at the same time. And then, because normally the only thing that a nonprofit, which these are, only pays on interest income. So when in the money that they get on their savings accounts.
Okay, thank you. So we're already halfway through this, so I wanted to move on to insurance. So we've been hearing a lot about insurance as a whole for
Are you
HOAs.
kidding me?
We're already an hour through. Insurance issues in terms of even single family homes, but in terms of HOAs, what are you seeing in terms of insurance issues, both in terms of the master insurance policy as well as the HO6, the walls in insurance? What are some things that you're seeing there that we need to be aware of?
So this has been an up and down. I've spent some time this last week knowing that I wanted to talk about this. The insurance in a lot of our area in California, especially where you are, is considered fire country. And so what I'm seeing there is that the premiums for the associations for the fire is going up by about 25%. It can go up as high as 25%. I haven't seen anything over that yet. Again, that is, you're looking at the policy statement. You want it to include ordinance coverage, because as the buildings get older, that ordinance coverage does come into play because they have to build it to today's codes, not when it was built in 1989 or whatever. So that I'm seeing, those are the ones that are getting the higher premiums. Certainly that is in wildfire arena. Individual homeowner policies I'm not as familiar with, but I have been asking the agents about that. They're telling me that they're going up by 10 to 15. 15 is the highest, but somewhere right around 5 to 10% increases. That again, if you're in a condominium, the associations covers everything except for deductibles. So when you get an HO6 policy on that, you take that into consideration when you're getting your policy. You can reduce the deductibles down to a more reasonable, like a 500 or 1,000. Associations are in the $10,000 to $50,000 category. So if your master policy has a $25,000 first, that's the part that you have to, that's the deductible. The association doesn't touch that until it hits 25. So you want your policy to be able to pick that up with a lesser deductible on your behalf. It could be 1,000, 1,500, whatever you want. But the higher your deductible that you're going to take out of your pocket versus what your insurance company is going to be will lessen the amount of increase that you're going to have. So those are things on that.
Great. And just to, for people who aren't, I think most people here are aware, but for a condominium, you're going to have a master insurance policy that covers the whole HOA and the main buildings, the shared buildings. And then the HO6 is also called the walls in policy, which is for each individual unit. So Jackie, are there things when you're looking at an insurance policy, a master insurance policy, what are you looking for? What are some red flags that you've seen that will trigger a little bit of a concern?
Okay, let me clear up one thing. All of the insurance policies on the condominiums are not always walls in.
That's true. Yeah.
That's the first thing that you got to make sure.
I mean,
of.
they call it quote unquote walls in, but
Yes, yeah, they call it walls in
Mhm.
because they don't come in and replace your cupboards, your countertops, your dishwashers. If there's a fire, I burnt my kitchen down one time. My daughter was coming home from school and goes, the fire truck, the fire, oh my gosh, it's in front of my house. My mother has been doing candles again. I was trying to do candles in those days. And you know, you have to have a double boiler. Nobody told me that part. So I had my kitchen burned down. So at that point, it covered everything. So if somebody spilled water on or wine on their carpet, we'd replace their carpet. Over the years, the insurance companies have grown and their knowledge of what they are going to pay for and what they aren't. Regardless, if you're going to go with the HOA and it's a walls up to your walls, doesn't include any of your personal items and or any of those upgrades that you've just done. So you want to make sure that that's on your HO6 policy. We are seeing some of these that are a little bit older that are more like stacked on top of each other. Walls in is a better way to go, but then you've got to look at the deductibles. So if the deductible on a walls in is $25,000, you're still stuck in getting a policy that will help cover the lower part of that. So it's kind of a catch-22. I say give the policy that you get or the statement of coverages to your own agent and say, I need to get around, be covered around this. And I'm more this year than ever, I'm seeing the $25,000 part where they have to pay the first 25. So to me, that's co-insurance. To an insurance company, it's just, we've got to protect ourselves. So yeah, it's very walls in. You still want to look at certain things because there might be depreciation categories in there. I'm not really an insurance agent. And by the way, I should have made this quantum. I am not an attorney. But I'm an old woman and I read a lot and I do retain a lot. So these pieces should fit the categories that you're talking about. Deductibles is a really important part of you when you've got a buyer. The lower category ones, I hate to say it, but their deductibles have gone up the most. So be really conscious of that when you're helping to address that with your clients and help them find agents if they don't have one that understands HOAs and can read the HOA policy, at least the statement.
And have you seen a lot of like the blanket insurance policies at all, or is that?
Blanket insurance just means that they're going to make sure that it gets built the way that it was originally built.
So, no, I mean policies where I think the lenders don't like the policies where maybe an association will partner up with others and try to cover it together to get it cheaper.
Okay, yes, no, I don't see many of those here. Okay. I do in San Francisco and I do in Los Angeles.
And can you go into that a little bit then, just since San Francisco?
Well, it depends on the management company that you have. Some of these larger ones have figured out I don't want to mention any names because most of these big ones are out buying up smaller management companies. You don't know that they got bought, but that larger company now owns, and they go out and they put the insurance policies under their agent. And that's where you get into problems because I don't like those at all. I've fought against those for many years, even when they were teaching managers how to do it. Most of the management companies weren't large enough to do it. But if one of those properties goes away, they have a heck of a time getting a policy because they've been under this umbrella policy where they had lots and lots of stuff. But in essence, they had, when they separate from that company, they no longer have the kind of buying, I guess, being able to do it at a lower rate. So watch out for those. Get clear on the fact that how they work it, what happens if that association does go away, will that insurance carrier still handle that association, or does it have to be tied to that management company? I know there's some other details on that that I have not become aware of, but it changes all the time, so.
So I do see a couple other questions coming in, but I'm gonna keep going for a little bit. So everybody who's putting in questions, feel free to keep them coming and I'll try to make sure we catch them all. We're gonna go on to the next topic, which is financing. So lenders and guidelines. What are the changes that you're seeing that we should be aware of? I think you mentioned a couple already, but is there anything else in terms of lenders and how they're handling, whether it be the balcony inspections, whether it be other things, anything more that you'd like to talk about?
One of the things that I got to do with First Franklin is I got to do pre-underwriting, and then I was fascinated, so I did underwriting. You get a manual and you're looking at a piece of property. You go to that manual to find the specifics on that kind of a property, and that's what you underwrite to. So you have to answer all of those questions, okay? So in the marketplace, the way that it is right now, because FHA has come out with new guidelines that have already started in most instances, the underwriters that have been underwriting one way for, let's say, a bank, in order to sell that to the secondary market or have that be available to sell to the secondary market, it has to fit those guidelines. FHA's guidelines, again, remember I said, if you've got somebody going in on a 12 to 15%, that's even the 3%ers, you know, and we have VA loans that are no down. So most of those are held by the government anyway. If it's a VA loan, you don't have as many twists and turns to it. But if you've got somebody that's going in legally under the radar with 5% down up to about, it has to go up to 20. Once they hit 20% down, the scrutiny on the HOA is going to be a little bit less. I am seeing associations that are being turned away because they do not have adequate funds in the reserves and do not operate under the lines that FHA is asking for. Again, California always sets the trend, and how it goes in California, how it goes with the rest of the nation. We're seeing that because FHA has taken a hold of this and they're nationwide, they're setting the guidelines. We're still seeing fallout on that. I don't know all the new guidelines yet because some of the underwriters have been extremely busy. And so the ones that I call and talk to about this stuff, I haven't got all the detail, but we are seeing a shift in the market. So you want the buyer and you want them at whatever they want to put down, but there is a risk when it gets to the lender that they're not going to be able, the association has to also be qualified. They're qualified for what you've got in there, but they're not qualified under the new FHA guidelines for the sale of that to a secondary market.
Got it. And if you have a condo that doesn't follow those guidelines, the Fannie, Freddie, or FHA loans, VA loans, so they're non-warrantable by those standards, how long does it take to get back in good favor? Like, can it happen overnight if they fix?
They may never get into good favor for what they're asking for, because The smaller ones don't see this as the same way as the bigger ones. The bigger ones have a lot more guidelines, a lot more people inputting. The small projects don't see that there's anything wrong with it till the board president tries to sell and finds out his project can't be because it doesn't follow the Davis Sterling. Davis Sterling, it might be a good idea to kind of talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Articles and bylaws are corporate laws. Do not, even though they're governing documents, they are not civil code. They are corporate code, and they have to meet that standard. Most of these associations that have been around for 15, 20 years never have done it. So all the declarant, who was the developer, all their rules are still in there, and the laws have changed drastically since then, and they're harder to enforce. So those, when we're doing the reviews for the HOAs, we're recommending that they do it, and they go, oh, it's too much money and it takes too long. Well, that's like going through a stop sign, because last week it was a cruise through kind of like, and so we had a test in the area that I live in where they had a camera, and the camera took your picture and it got your license plate as you went through the red light just in a certain spot. And I got a ticket in the mail. And I'm fighting this. I didn't go through that. And sure enough, they showed me the picture. Oh, no. So rules are agreements that we make with, if we're going to drive a car, those are the laws. Davis Sterling are the laws that are civil code, and those take a little bit more. They take the legislature. You have somebody who puts the bill on the table. They do all their little beating up on that. Then it goes to the committees, and once the committees have approved it, then it goes to the legislature, and once they agree to it, it goes to the desk of the governor. And once he signed it, it's chartered in. It is now law. Up to that point, it's just a wild, oh yeah, we got to do this. And that's how Davis Sterling became a lady by the name of, Larry Sterling was the legislator, and the lady, I'm trying to remember what her name was. I know it as well as I know my own, but she got into a condominium. She was a professor at Stanford, and she kept complaining about all these laws. Well, then when they went there, now where it's at today is because of her and Larry Sterling. That's how the Davis Sterling became law. So civil codes around everything to do with an association. CC&Rs are recorded. Articles of incorporation, they're corporate. They're filed with the corporation, the Secretary of State. The bylaws are not a recorded document. So the articles with the state, the CC&Rs with the county, because that becomes on your preliminary title report. You need to be looking at your preliminary title report, because the reason we're asking for them is we're finding a lot of documents that have been restated that never got transferred to the preliminary title report, because the title report only runs those things every once in a while, or when they find something that's out of whack. So they sometimes, they could restate it 3 years ago and they're still not on your prelim, but yet it is actually the governing document. So the prelim's incorrect. Then it's the other way around. They have some documents at the county that maybe the managers or the older projects have never been brought in. So that's why I get those the preliminary title reports to verify. I would say 1 out of every 15, we find that they've restated their governing documents and haven't got caught up on the prelim. And that's really, the prelim is supposed to tell you everything that's recorded. You'll see those liens that I'm talking about for voluntary want to make payments that they put the lien on. So the prelims are really important from where I sit in making good judgment as to if you go in and you check it. Like I've got one of ours that's got, they restated the documents in 2005, and then they did an amendment 4 different times until this last one. And there's 5 different recordings. The last one was not on the prelim that I looked at today. So now we can, and that happened to be the rental restriction.
So just to back up a little bit, so first I put into the chat, and you've shared it with me before, a great resource is the David Sterling website. So that has a lot of information regarding the laws. But back up to the question previously in terms of, so if it is it's not compliant with all the laws, and then they find out because the board president decides to sell his condo, and they go, okay, well, we have to fix this. How soon, if they start working on it, how soon can they actually be put back on the good person list?
On the good list. Well, because the lenders are not asking for our report, so they don't really know where they're in or out of compliance. They can tell by the fact that there's a deficit in the reserves. So that's what they're looking for. So that's theirs. They could be on the good list with having a big special assessment coming down the line, and they didn't know it because they didn't have the documents to look at. Okay. So being on the good list with FHA and Freddie and Fannie is different than a board of directors complying with the law to make sure that it is operating under the guidelines of the David Sterling. Most of the time, the smaller ones do not see the value of any of this. So they do their books on the accounting on cash flow. I'm going to go next door to Tom and tell him he hasn't made the payment this month. He'll give me the check and I'll walk out with it. You know, that kind. So they should have a scale, I think, between 5 and up to 100 units of certain guidelines, but they aren't. David Sterling is David Sterling, regardless of your size. So those people that think that they're going to get somebody to come into compliance, if you've got 5 people, you might have 5 people that all show up at a meeting and they all look at the same clock and not be able to see the same time. And I know that because I have a board of directors that they do 2 guys have stopwatches, and so they have seconds and their time is done by seconds. The other ones look at it as if it's just changing to a new time. You know, I mean, so the big thing here is the laws are the laws. It's all about whether they do it or not, and about the person that's buying it, whether they're okay with it. I had one lady go in and she's been the board's worst nightmare. She's now the board president. And now she's going to be everybody's worst. And I tease her all the time because I said, come from your heart more than you do making somebody wrong about not doing something. And I have to remind her that. I said, otherwise I'm going to call you that name that they call the woman that always is bugging everybody, always has an opinion. So again, we don't want to make the decision for our clients, but we want to give them that level of compliance. If it's compliant, it gets a check, it gets a comment. If it's not in compliance, it gets a check. It does not get a check, but it still gets a comment. Then the buyer can say, well, they haven't had a meeting in 2 years, and they're supposed to be looking at financials every quarter. So there's, okay, I can go in and get involved, or I'm never going to get involved. They buy it, they buy what they get. So there's 2 functions: that house that they've fallen in love with the minute they went through the door, and that value based on somebody running a multi-million-dollar corporation in a certain way. It's very subjective to every person that you're doing. You need, as an agent who is listing, make sure you get as many of the documents and you ask for the others, because the seller is ultimately the responsible party. If the association isn't in compliance, he's still responsible because he didn't tell him. Yeah. So you want that off of that back of them. So you want a note that goes to the association that says, we need the minutes for the last 6 months. If you didn't have a meeting, notify that. Seller is now complete, and he is also they are also protected.
And in terms of the whole lender and the good list and the bad list, I know there are some lenders that actually have a database in terms of communities that they've lended in recently or haven't lended in recently. So there is that. There's also an FHA list where you can look up FHA approved condos, and that process, I tried that many years ago, and it requires the board to cooperate and provide a lot of documents, and it's pretty labored. So I think with every condo, like you said, it's up to us to kind of make sure to do our homework and see what.
Well, now it's
we
defaulting
can
to the
happen.
new guidelines to sell on the secondary market, so you're gonna start seeing another shift.
Some more of that as well.
But it's still, things don't change overnight, and it takes a long time to get in in the homeowner association industry. The game of gossip is far wide, okay? So, and some of these associations are not managed. In fact, to bring to your attention, some of them are not even incorporated. However, the Secretary of State 5 years ago said, even if you're not incorporated, you must register with us every 2 years. So there is a registration. You can go to the Secretary of State, put in the name of the association, and get all kinds of information, like whether, and the big thing on the FHA being approved or not approved is now more individual with the mortgage company, and sometimes even the mortgage company office. But
Agreed.
the guidelines are the same.
Okay, great. So you mentioned in terms of, and this is a question somebody had asked a little earlier, but going back to you mentioned an attorney opinion letter if we can't get the questionnaire or the board to give information. So can you go a little bit into that in terms of what does that mean? Like, what does it cover? What does it cost to get some kind of a letter like that?
That's not your letter, it's for the association to have.
Mhm.
And because I'm now back in management, I've had to look at things a little differently again. And I now remember why I didn't like it as much as I like reviewing. Okay, so the big thing here is that your governing documents, your bylaws, your CC&Rs, remember the two that are for the state because they're corporate laws, and then you've got the CC&Rs. Those CC&Rs are extremely important because they identify exactly what is recorded against that association, depending on who the attorney was that did them. So now we get some new laws, and let's just use the balcony law for one. A homeowner association that is a true condominium, airspace, walls in, floors up, ceiling down ownership is going to be bound by that particular that civil code. Okay, they can't get out of it. They have to do those inspections, 3 units or more. Then you have the planned unit development, which may look like a condominium, but in essence, the recorded document states that it's a planned unit development. And if it's a planned unit development, that means you've got to look at the documents that the owners would be responsible for all the maintenance. So let's go back to condominiums, because this is where the letter from the attorney is going to be important. So the association has a responsibility to do the inspections, as long as they have wood-bearing supports that hold up that balcony. If it's steel, they're not going to be responsible for those inspections because termites don't eat steel. They don't even like it, So they're not going to be responsible. In that particular instance, the governing documents don't spell out that it's got a structure of steel. And it doesn't also say that the balconies are held up onto that building with wood. So in those instances where there's a disconnect where you don't really know, the association should spend it's anywhere from 1 hour to, let's say, 5 hours. So the least it could cost is 1 hour's worth of your attorney's time. Most associations have an attorney that they work with. And on the upside, it could go up to the $1,000 mark that they get this opinion letter. It is cheaper than trying to tell somebody we're not responsible because we have a steel base. Our frame is base. In those instances, even if it's steel, I still get those letters because the attorney spells it out. Don't be looking for it because it's not required. We've got a steel frame. However, if there's any part of that building where there's wood attached to any of those parts, they would address that, and then it would fall under the Davis-Sturm Act, which requires that inspection. So that's what that attorney opinion letter is. Our buildings are structured with X. We are not responsible for that civil code.
But is an HOA required to provide that, or why would they go?
They
through
can
that?
say we don't do that, and then you're looking at the risk. They also are not doing their inspections or haven't signed up for them. And if they haven't done that, come January 1st, 2025, they're going to be in the world of hurt. But that's going to hand down there. So our sellers are gone. Our buyers have bought, and they fall into that category. So the two things that would be, they didn't do the inspection. You've got a letter from the association. We didn't do those inspections. We didn't feel that we were responsible. But now they find out that they are. That board of directors, there would be a cause of action by those members to try and recoup some of their money. And that's why there's an errors and admissions policy. They can make decisions all day long, but if they make one that is driven by a civil code and they don't comply with it, it's a lot stronger that the owners can go back and sue them, at which point your insurance is going to go up because it's going to be a lot of money. So again, it's really, it's an evaluation. We're not getting 100% disclosures on any of our packages, even when we send back a list that goes back to the homeowners association, whether it's the board or the association. So then it is what it is, and that's the only thing that you can do. You've done your due diligence. You've asked for the seller on behalf of the seller, because the association is not a party to your transaction. They're only responsible to that seller and their agent. Some of them are even saying, we're not dealing with the agents either, and we don't deal with the title companies, right?
Yeah.
They don't get to pick and choose if you ask, and it's in writing, and the seller provides it to them. The only thing they can do, and if they don't answer at all, which is a pretty large number, that they just ignore you, you have the fact that you've sent that request and you didn't get the answer. The buyer loved it so much they went in there. Now they have a problem 2 or 3 years later. They come back to you, oh, I didn't know. Well, here's the email that we had in there. We did ask for that. They didn't provide it. So, there's things that it's really pre-thinking rather than reacting. You're either proactive or you're reactive. And as a real estate agent for buyers, I think we have to be a little more proactive these days than ever before.
Yeah, for sure. So are there any other new laws that you haven't touched upon that you'd like to bring up that we should be aware of?
So
I know there's a lot coming on as well, but anything that you
we'll
think-
come back to those, okay? So there's some things that aren't going to be in place. I don't know how, what's he wanting to. He probably signed about 25 bills on the associations that I thought the ones that were interesting, that would be interesting to you guys at this point.
So the governor just signed it.
Governor has signed them. He has to sign them before the end of October. He always signs them at the first part, and then they go into law on January 1st of the coming year.
Mhm.
So all of these are I'm only gonna give you a couple of them because I thought they were kind of
Thank you.
interesting. I will make note that there is going to be a limitation for documents. Let me just tell you this, you don't have to remember this because it's been chartered in, but it's not going to affect most of us at this point. The bill that he passed was that the association, if their declaration is recorded on January 1st, 2024, imposing increases in regular assessments on an owner of a deed restricted policy. Now, remember the ones that are older than January 1st. So if they're restating them, they better state this. If there's a deed restricted BMRs, you're going to have to be aware of which ones have below market value, I would say anything after about 1997 or 78, they had that's when the program kind of came in and became popular. You're going to want to check, and almost every association that's being built then and now will have this restriction. So if it's a deed restriction, they're going to only be able to increase the dues by 10% on those. The homeowners that pay full price on these are going to be a little bit upset. Of course, that below market rate was to get people in, didn't mean they were going to be sit. They thought this one, they tried to get rid of it, but they didn't get rid of it. So we're going to have to deal with it till they amend it. So that is something, if you're going to sell and there is a below market value, make sure that you're connecting with the city. Some of the below market value on the older ones have gone away altogether now, so everybody is equal. My dog is having a fit outside the door. She's not in here below by her. So then another one is virtual meetings. This has become a really big issue since, hang on just to have a second. Let me see if I can close the door instead. Abby, you cannot come in. That's the value of working from home, but the disadvantage at the same time. Okay, so elections. Virtual meetings have been being okay up till January 1st of 2024. You can still have virtual meetings, with the exception you still have to have a location where people can go in person to all the open meetings. If it's an election meeting between now and December 31st, you can't hold a virtual meeting if you have to count ballots. After this time, then you will still have to have a location, because if you have to count ballots, you have to count ballots. You're going to start seeing the articles of incorporation stating that it can all be done. There's a whole bunch of things that they're changing, so everything can be done by mail or email. That was a big one because a lot of these places are still not holding meetings as regular. Their bylaws govern how many board meetings the board has to have, how many members they have to have. I'm finding that they kind of ignore it because somebody says, I've got a dinner date, or, oh my gosh, my kids are in this school play or whatever. Regardless that they should have been meeting, I say a minimum of quarterly. There are some associations that have very little, if any, real business that they conduct on a regular basis, but they still have to review their financials. So there's some laws that have forced that. Accessory dwelling units, he signed a couple of bills on that. We're not going to go through that because that really doesn't affect associations as much. Although we are seeing it in planned developments where garages are being converted. There's not enough parking. This was the last one that I thought was rather interesting. Small Claims Court has raised small claims limits from 12,500 to 35,000. So people that are unhappy with their association will start suing them if they've got a value attached to it of around $35,000. Those were the biggest ones. So not too many that really affect us on a daily basis, but certainly things that you can talk about. There's one website that Larry Sterling is a part of the law firm. It's called Davis-Sterling. I think that's.
I put that in. Yep, I put that into the chat.
Okay, that one is an awesome one. They've even got videos, 2-minute videos. So if you've got a first-time home buyer, send them to the one as why isn't a homeowner association important? Give them that and give them homework. Look at 2 or 3 of these that interest you. And then we, just know a little bit more about what you're getting into. And the videos are really excellent. I think they've done a great job, especially since they can keep them through under 3 minutes. There are some that are longer. The balcony one, I think it's over an hour. I went to that seminar. So that one was a little more lengthy if you want more detail about that from the law firms and stuff. Also, that one has any subject that you want. There's an index that you can go in push the button, go to that topic that you have and go through it and get information. Those topics now, if there is a video that goes along with it, you will see the little arrow for getting into it at that location. That to me is the best education. If you can't sleep at night, go look at the Davis Sterling website. It'll keep you alive and warm.
It'll hopefully either put you to sleep or get you awake.
It'll
and
get you to sleep.
There is at least one question, but I did want to make sure that we cover. So if you had advice, I mean, you've given a lot of information already, but as agents who represent our buyers and sellers, what are things that we need to do to be proactive? You mentioned something about the prelim. And then can you go a little bit into also what your company does? Because I think that goes hand in hand with what we can do to be proactive.
Right. So the prelims to me are magic. I love the prelims. And the reason is every document that is recorded by the association should be on there. And you might not know unless you have a review done, which is what we do. But if you do have your prelim, check those boxes and make sure that you've gotten those documents in your package, because sometimes they get lost. It's like the game of gossip. Things get dropped out as they get passed to one manager or a board of directors or whatever. The second thing I love about the preliminary title reports is that there is a property description. If you see the word unit, you're guaranteed that it's a condominium. Because if it says lot, it is always a planned development. But remember, I said those are kind of facades because you got to go behind the curtain and look at those governing documents that are recorded against that property. I almost always will put the CC&Rs and the bylaws into searchable documents so they are easier to read. But you can go in there. There's a couple of, I know there's anywhere from 50 to 200 or 500 pages to the CC&Rs. But it is set up in a way that it is easy to read. There'll be things like the use restrictions. If you go to the index and it says use restrictions, go hang out there for a little while because it's going to tell you all the things you can and can't do with that property. Rental restrictions. Rental restrictions in an older set of documents are invalid unless it says there's things that it has to say. And one of them is they have to allow now that what rule that went into being, I think it was last year or year before last, they must allow a minimum of 25% of them to be rented in any association. Makes no difference. So whether it's 10 units or whatever, 25% of them, because a lot of them were being kind of nose up in the air saying, we don't want any more than 10% in here. And so they would do that. And they would make it in their CC&Rs that no more than 10% can be validated. Well, now the civil code and our great governor signed the bill, and now it became law that they have to allow a minimum of 25%. Now that's only so good. You have to have a cap on it too. Sometimes they'll just put 25% for both, and it doesn't say both, but if it's just 25%, you're almost guaranteed that that's the limit of what can be rented in there, even though it's also what they're supposed to have. The reason is the lenders, and we go back to them a little bit here, the lenders were saying, wait a minute, we're not going to loan in a project that's 49% or 48% rentals. We're not investment property lenders. We're individual homeowner lenders. And so sometimes when it gets to be more people that go to the meetings because they represent, like my building in San Francisco, 32 of 38 units are owned by the developer. He made an agreement with the city of San Francisco that he would rent 18 of them. And then the next thing he couldn't sell them, the other ones that he had. So they were going broke every month and they had a construction loan that they had to refinance. And they couldn't refinance as long as they didn't have the money coming in. So they rented all of them. It is the worst you have ever seen. I could show you pictures of my trash room. We have 3 pickups a week and it's a mess. So all of these things that are governing these associations and the lenders are involved with, of course, nothing is selling in there, so we don't have to worry about loans right now. But as soon as we do, unless they vacate at least 50% of their units and not get money on them anymore, they're going to have a very hard time finding lenders, because lenders want it to be occupied by owners, not renters. They're, as much as I love renters and they pay their bills, because that's how the developer sends me a check every month to pay their bills on the association, I cannot get them to separate it in their brain. I tell them, front door in, mine, yours. Front door out, mine. Do not touch my common area. It doesn't help any. So lenders are different in every way, except that is a big one right now, is the number of rentals versus the owners.
And you'll see those rental restrictions if in the CCNRs and the prelim. So,
Yes.
So continuing with the prelim though, Lee has a question about sometimes the parking spaces are actually also included in the prelim. Other
Yeah.
times you see them assigned. So is there a difference between that? And what, if so, what are the
Absolutely.
pros and cons?
So I don't like to say the olden days, but it was the olden days. Developers would grant deed as much as they possibly could to individual people. If you've got a garage and your unit is above it, those were always pre-assigned. They're part of the property that you own. Therefore, you will see that that isn't even a question. But then sometimes they had over covered patio or parking. Sometimes they have open space. Sometimes they have detached garages elsewhere. And so if that's the case, they would assign them instead. But then if they did assign them, they also grant deeded them. So you will see that more of the time than not. If all of a sudden the developer was just crazy, it wasn't going to be a problem. There was more than enough parking because we didn't have to have electric charging stations and all of that. They didn't assign them. If they assigned them, the association should have some kind of a tracking, which most of them didn't keep very good. I have one this last week where they said, well, we got 2 garages. We got the one that's attached to our unit, but we also bought this other one. Well, if they bought it, it wasn't part of their grant deed. So they can't claim it unless they have some kind of a document that was recorded that says, this is yours, you bought it.
So
So
ideally it should be assigned in the grant deed. It should be part of
It
the,
should be part of the grant deed. If it is not and it is assigned, it does not belong to you, except for maybe one might have an assignment, but it's still like grant deeding it, but it's just assigned to you. It's not part of the property that you own. So you have to look at that. But if they're all assigned parking places, which a lot of them had a lot of open spaces for guests, and they decided, well, we can make money if we rent these. So those might be rental spaces, but when you sell the property, it does not automatically go with it. It is not grant deeded.
Got
So that certainly is a question that you've got to ask up front when you're doing the listing.
and is there a disadvantage to having it included in your grant deed? I would think that you'd want it there, but is
Yeah,
there
the
any?
advantage of having it as a grant deed, nobody else can come and park in it or store stuff in it.
Okay, but there's no disadvantage. I mean, you want that to happen, right?
Yeah,
have
that
a
that
deed.
is the best of all
Without
worlds.
question.
It's been assigned and it shows up in the property description.
Got
And
it.
it
So,
will, like the person said, it will show up in there as a P dash and then a number.
mhm, mhm. Got it. Okay, and I again, I wanted to ask you as well, so what does your company do while we're kind of
Okay.
wrapping up? And then I do have a couple other questions if.
Great,
people
okay,
hang out.
so our company, I always have a pet peeve about something, and I had a new grandbaby and I wanted to go see her, so I went every day. And my daughter finally said, Mom, are you gonna come here every day? I said, every day. But I'll change the time if it is more convenient for you, but I'm gonna come and spend time with her. So anyway, I would do that, and she finally said, Mom, you have so many pet peeves, go start a new business. And I had a lot of real estate. I had my real estate license at the time, and I had a lot of real estate friends that did not understand this concept. So in 1998, I started just taking all the documents, reviewing them as a courtesy. And then I realized the laws change every year and you have to get a lot smarter every year and you have to stay on top of that kind of stuff. I started a business. And some of you, I know Jan and goes way back with me. I know several of the brokers, and they know that my price has increased considerably because of the laws and because of the changes of what has to be done. We do what's called a civil code compliance review. All of our reviewers are certified. We've made sure that we've tested them. We start them out by giving them a package that's kind of a little bit difficult. And then we say, check the box if you found it. And then they do that. And then the report comes out like that. Well, then it said, well, wait a minute. We don't want to have to go through 15 pages to find out all the major comments. So all the comments are now put into a report on top of the report that identifies, and you can see exactly what's missing. Then we provide a list of what is missing or outdated that's supposed to be in there. And that is what you use to send back to the association to access those missing documents. If you need an extra hammer and I'm on the seller side, I will take that notice and I will send it back to the manager and say, they bought it offline. The documents were not incorporated at that time. Please supply these. You're not going to go back online and have to pay all over again or try and remember or figure out what is, because everybody sort of a industry issue is they name things differently than what they are and then in the governing documents. So we will go back and we say these are documents that should have been provided that the seller is responsible for. So if you do not have them, put in writing here that they are not available and why. We used to just say they're not available, but then we started saying the board isn't doing their job. You want, not that you're trying to point fingers, but they've got a fiduciary duty. They took on that mantle as soon as they got elected or voted, volunteered. So we try and help you out there on the seller side. On the buyer side, you're going to get our list, and that'll be up to you to go back to access the documents. If we're on the buyer side, we have a half-hour phone conversation with you and your clients. It doesn't ever go 1.5 hours. It's always more than that. We're not opposed to that because we want the buyer to understand what they're getting into. So that's always very valuable. They ask their own questions and we're able to guide them. And sometimes we're able to go back and get further documents for them through the seller. But the association is only responsible to your sellers, not to you, not to anybody else. Sometimes they'll be gracious to the real estate agents because they might have to use you someday.
And how much is the cost of that report, the civil code compliance report?
Our fee right now is $575. It doesn't make any difference which end of the document thing is on.
And regardless of size of the complex?
No, the size of the complex either, because the size doesn't make any difference. That's one of my comments, is it doesn't make any difference if it's 3 units or more. Anytime you get somewhere where you can have 2 people voting against one, that's a little bit of a problem. So those are, but they're all under the Davis Sterling.
Okay, thank you. And we have time for a couple more questions. So one that came up early on, but I didn't get to address it, is foundation. So have you seen any situations where an individual unit owner might be responsible for a foundation repair, and how would that work? Have you seen any complexes like that, or
Yes, I have. In fact, I was a disclosure company on one for 8 years. They denied the fact that they were moving towards 85. And then pretty soon they were, 3 of them were of a 4 building were off their foundations by at least 2 to 3 inches.
Wow. But the unit owner paid for that, or the association pays for that?
Depends again if it's a condominium or a planned development and what the governing documents say.
Got it.
If it's structural like that, and they say that the association is responsible in an airspace, yes, the association is responsible, but where are they going to get the money from? They're going to get it from the pocketbooks of the owners, and it may be that that problem is only 1 unit. They will have to fix it. If it's a planned unit development and it says that the owner is responsible for the structure and the land underneath, they're gonna be responsible. But can you, we had one of those too. It was a nightmare trying to get the other 3 people to allow the construction team to be in there, pounding and beating, and one of the ladies had a new baby, and there's just a lot of stuff around that. I think there has to be, I'm hoping that someday that there will be a guideline that if it's structural and you're gonna have to fight with your neighbor to get it done, it's gotta be something that the association takes on.
Gets in charge.
They
Yeah.
have to, they're getting the funds in and that type of thing. They can do it easier than having you fight with your neighbor for
Right.
10
Agreed.
years to be able to get something done.
And going back to the report, so how long does it take to get a report, and what's
We're-
your recommended lead time from review to listing?
Okay, so I would say that if you're gonna list a piece of property on December the 1st, no later than the 15th of November, actually before that, when you take the listing and you put it on the multiple listing service, you should have that set of documents already. I know that there's a time frame where you go in and get it all fixed up and do the staging and all of that. During that time, order your documents.
Right.
We're at 3 working days right now, and that basically gives you a list of missing or outdated documents. If we're on the buyer side, we will send that to the association for you because we have a little bit more of a hammer. We're a third-party inspection that is telling them what we're looking for. They're less likely to say, go away, we're gonna just pacify you until you go away. If you're on the seller side, the seller has to go get those documents. You should have those documents reviewed prior to going on the market. Because that is where you're gonna get the bang for the buck. You're gonna get us to be able to go back for you instead of having to go back through the seller. We're at 3 working days right now. That's to set it up. Doesn't take long to set it up, but it does to organize the documents. You guys are really great, and I love IO. But you're putting all of your contract and your association documents all in the same one. And by doing that, the buyer is totally confused in 9 out of 10 times. And that's an exaggeration, but a lot of the time they're just, what do I want to know about the No, just look for the HOA. Well, where are they? Where do they start? Where do they end? There's no real dividing point. I know where they start because I know what you guys do. But what do I need to, what do I need to do? Do I need to read every single document? The answer to those questions are all yes, all the time. Will we? Will they or will we? No. 9 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10, they won't because they don't know what they're looking for. That's why the report allows you that ability to discern, and then you know what we know as far as the financial health. That's probably your biggest downfall right now, not knowing that, so that when you get hit with somebody that's had a review from us and they come back and we said, well, right here in black and white, it says that you're $35,000 deficit in your reserves per door. We want you to reduce your price. And you're blindsided. You got to go back. Yes, the market is $35,000 more than what you listed it for, but they're coming back with something in black and white because that, you know, our listings are, I don't want to, they're concepts. It's what we want, not what we're going to get. The other side is what we want and what we're entitled to from the buyer side. So if you look at it that way, get ahead of the game, know it so that you can, because a lot of times you can say, look, we're selling it at this price. And you can say, we know there's a deficit, you buy the deficit and we'll help pay your closing costs. Find something in that transaction that both sides can benefit from, something that's going to be a tax write-off for the seller, so they don't have to pay income on that, but they still get a price that's really to their liking.
Sure.
So there's that's called negotiation.
Negotiation, exactly. That's what we get paid for, right? It's not for just putting up a sign. So there is a question from Michael about how do 2-unit HOAs work, since, you know, we've been talking about 3+, but how 2 units work. And I did want to also call out to people who need to start dropping off that the website for Jackie's company, I put it in the link. So that's probably the best way to reach her right? Or Jackie, did you want me to, did you want to share something more
The
personal?
phone number is 408
Okay.
226 2437. It will call forward to my phone right now. I will be out of town for 3 days before Thanksgiving, and I will be coming back the Monday after. But we do have people that are on staff that will it'll be transferred to them. We do like to pick up our phone rather than sending you somewhere to do something, but you can use email or I take anything so that we can get that done. And we are revamping so that you'll even be able to pay right online. It is an upfront fee, by the way, because we find sometimes they don't like what we tell them and then they don't want to, go through with the costs.
Okay.
So,
And then going back just quickly, 2 units, just a very.
yeah, I was gonna go there.
Yep.
As you can tell, it's probably one of my.
We're at 3, so we need to wrap it up.
It's like a marriage. Can you get 2 people to agree to everything all of the time? Probably not.
Yeah.
Therefore, 2 units, and originally it might be, I'm the owner and I'm going to make this a condo project and my son's gonna live in this other one. And yeah, he really likes to party and all of that, but I can live with it. He's just not under the same roof as I am. So those, in the beginning, it might be really easy to get agreement. But other than that, you don't have any rights to say who gets to buy that. So it depends on how well you get along with that neighbor, how well they go. They are always broken. They always feel, we'll just ask you to bring out your checkbook and pay for whatever we want. And they work, but they don't work as well as they should. There's always conflicts of interest. One wants a new roof, the other one doesn't think it's necessary. Sometimes I want my front door painted and you don't like the color that I want. There's a lot of disadvantages, but certainly there are a lot of them out there right now.
But they don't have the same kind of requirements that, you would. Oh, I mean, in terms of like, you have to have, I don't know, the reserve study done or things like that. They don't have as many of those.
Yes, that is all part of it. There's no designation from 2, which is the minimum. 1, you wouldn't have a condo, but 2 starts the process of all of those disclosures. Now, again, the board of directors is ultimately the responsible party for, maintaining them. So 2 people, when you're getting a new person, it's a unique situation, but certainly you have to get agreement. And there's no way to do that always. But the truth is that they are all under the Davis Sterling. They all have CC&Rs. They all have bylaws. They may not be incorporated, so they don't have articles, but they do have bylaws because that's how the board runs. They have to have a budget and they do have to have a reserve study. But for something like that, it's so nominal that they can usually get a couple of bids before they're going to do something. And again, almost all of those go by what is needed. Let's pay for it now rather than contributing to a reserve.
Got it. Great. So thank you again. So we're just past 3 o'clock. Thank you so much, Jackie, for all of the wealth of information. I know you can go on for hours and hours more.
I remember I asked you at the beginning. I get 2 hours.
Yeah, and we are talking about eventually. I think you're going to try to do a class, so like a more extensive class. But thank you so much. I would say everybody out there, more than trying to understand it, I think definitely contacting Jackie and making sure that,
there's so many different variations.
Right. You can't say, like somebody asked, is there a list of what you can find on the prelim? And it's like, it's unlimited what you can find on a prelim. So I think go to the experts like we always do. So any closing comments, Jackie, before we go?
I love working with your group, and I know a lot of your agents, and I've been doing classes in offices to try and help the brokers, because there's just so much to this that they can't be the go-to for everything. And if I don't know it, I know enough people that I can go and ask the questions to. So we would love to work with you and your clients. And I do have only one last thing. I've got this great Frenchman that works for me. He's got the best accent, but every day when I talk to him on the phone, I have to tell him, slow down. I repeat that again and again because I don't speak French, although I'm beginning to have a few words.
Hmm.
So he does do it. If you have a problem and with any of my reviewers, you always call me and I get involved. I don't let you walk away with feeling bad. Once in a great while, we'll have something will fall through the cracks. That's not our basic plus. We don't like that, but we will make it up to you every way we can.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing, like, even your phone number and your email address and whatnot. For everyone who's attending, thank you so much. We did record this. We haven't decided quite yet if we're going to share it or not with you. So I'll leave that up to SAMCAR because this is a SAMCAR hosted event, and we'll be talking about it. But Jackie did graciously say she'd be fine to have it recorded. So thank you everyone again for being here, and wishing you well, and hope this will be a
Thank
great
you,
resource
guys.
for you. Thank you so much, Jackie. Bye-bye.
Bye.